Understanding root depth is at the heart of making watering decisions. Different plants have different root depth, depending on how big they are and also what type of plant they are. The root depth, along with temperatures and soil quality, will determine how often and how long you need to water. So, I will cover here my watering times and frequencies that I water, but because there are so many factors at play, I can't tell you exactly how much or how long you need to water. You need to understand these concepts so that you can water correctly according to your temperatures, size of plants, and soil quality. So, as a basic rule, smaller, younger plants need more frequent, shorter periods of water. Larger plants need less frequent, longer, deeper water. The reason is because larger plants have deeper and larger root structures, and so they need gradual, long waterings that reach deep down into the soil. So let me give you an example. A new little centimeter tall seedling will have a root structure only a little deeper than it is tall. So, to give that little plant the proper amount of water it needs, you can see that you don't want the surface to dry out. So, you would need to water more often for less time to start. Also, as I mentioned before, heat is also a factor in deciding how much to water. So, when temperatures are higher, the ground dries out faster, and so you will need to determine based on the root depth of your plants how quickly the earth is drying out and if you need to water for longer or add another watering day. Also, keep in mind if your soil is sandy, it will dry out faster. Another thing to remember is that you need to be aware of what's under the surface because you might look out at your garden and it just looks so dry, but if you reach down a little deeper, you'll see, oh, it's hydrated. So, looking with your eyes is not the best gauge of whether or not you need to water. When seeds are young and small, they need overhead water, so like a spray. When I newly plant seeds through direct sowing, I will set my water to overhead water for about 5 minutes, 2 to 3 times a day, if the temperatures are up in the 80s. So that's usually around June. Sometimes I do a lot of sowing at that time. So in contrast, in the early spring, like for me that's in March, I direct sow and the rainwater every few days is enough to get my seeds to germinate because the temps are low and so my seedlings don't dry out as quickly. So you can see it's important. Well, so let me just say it's important to know that when trying to germinate seeds, if the seeds dry out even once, they will fail to germinate. So you can see that depending on the size of the plant, the depth of the roots, and the temperatures, you will make the call on how often and how long you need to water. So let me just give you an idea. When I direct sow seeds, as I mentioned, I make sure they never dry out completely. And once they get their own set of true leaves and get a little deeper roots, I decrease my watering to maybe once a week for 10 minutes, and then every other day for 15 minutes, and then eventually to once a week with drip irrigation rather than overhead spray for 45 minutes to an hour. And this will be less if the temperatures are cooler and a little more frequent when temperatures are hotter. You might hear this and think watering for 45 minutes to an hour might sound like a lot of water, but remember that drip irrigation releases water slowly. So actually, when I turned my west lawn into a vegetable garden, I now use less water than I did when it was grass. My lawn required 2 to 3 waterings a week, covering the whole square footage, whereas my garden requires water every 7 to 14 days and only waters the root zone of just where my plants are. So as I mentioned, when the air is drier and the temperatures are hotter, you will need to up your water frequency. A lot of plants will need water once a week for about half an hour to an hour. But when temps start hitting above 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius, somewhere in there, consistently, the same plants will not likely need 2 waterings a week rather than 1. So again, humidity, temperature, and also rainfall all factor into how much you will water and how often. When you water, you want to think slow and deep. Sprinkling for a short amount of time will only penetrate the top layer of soil, and if done over time, will give your plants shallow, weak root systems that are unable to get the nutrients they need, and roots will fail to support the leaves and branches and fruit. So, to sum it up, water so that your plants get deep, strong root systems by watering less often for longer periods of time. Water according to the size of your plant and the depth of your roots. Adjust how often you water according to your climate's humidity and temperatures. And as a place to start, once your plants are established, that's probably going to be around an hour for once a week for most of your plants. Some it'll be a little less frequent, and I'll talk about that in another video.